All right, so the third is eating animals. It's
Oh
pretty
God.
straightforward. Sam, you start us
Oh
off
yeah.
here. Do you think we can eat animal? Like it's morally permissible to eat animals? Is the question?
I think I struggle with this one a great deal because
Mm,
I am a meat eater. I'm not a I will out myself not as a vegetarian or vegan, um, but I think I really struggle with kind of to come up with arguments for why I should be allowed to be why it is morally permissible for me to be a meat eater. Other than I guess like sort of like speciesist ones of just that like we might value animals less, but even then I think even if we value animals less than we value humans, should that it's sort of like you can kind of picture it in a to spoil another one that comes up like a trolley problem scenario. If it's not like I am choosing between killing animals or killing humans, I'm just simply choosing between killing animals or kind of slightly inconveniencing myself by not having as nice tasting
mm.
food as I was before. And I guess if you were to get rid of like practical arguments against veganism or vegetarianism, which are just simply like to make everybody vegan overnight would just utterly like ruin multiple industries and perhaps like globally you mess up climate change and things like that. But I think it's quite hard to come up with arguments for meat eating like that make it morally permissible, in like an ideal world. But I don't know. What do you think about it?
I agree with you. I struggle with it, and I eat a lot of meat. And
Mm,
increasingly over time, I've come to the exact same place you did, where there are some good arguments, or at least seemingly plausible arguments against eating meat. I've not come up with any for them, specifically in most contexts. So what I said here is that I think it's becoming increasingly likely to me that it's impermissible to eat animals in most contexts, because if animals can experience pain in roughly the same way that we experience pain, if they have phenomenal consciousness, if they can suffer, well, then what we're doing on factory farms is horrific. I mean, beyond horrific. And many vegans make the point that it's just because animals can't talk, they don't have a language, they can't convey to us directly what they're going through. That's why we can fail to see it. But once we get over that conceptual leap and understand that there's still something going on inside, how do you justify the conditions we place like chickens in, for example, where they're in a box, a cage that's just as big as them, and that's it? I mean, if there's anything even half as conscious as human beings in that condition their whole lives, it's horrifying. And then the second point would be that I can't see any way to escape the conclusion that animals do in fact experience suffering at that level. That they're I mean, you could just blankly deny that animal consciousness, just say, well, they're just like robots. But there's no motivation for that view. And I think the same arguments you'd give for that could be used against saying that other people are conscious. I don't see a principled distinction. But that still leaves open the question about like more humane treatment of animals. Like, what if you have a farm and you let your livestock live a happy and fulfilling life and you kill them near the end of their natural lifespan anywhere, or hunting, for example, where they're killed humanely and painlessly? That's less clearly impermissible because I think there's a real difference between person and non-person animals. Obviously, we are animals, but we're also persons, and I think that makes a morally relevant difference. So I don't want to give into like baseless human exceptionalism, but insofar as we are people, we have personhood, and other animals do not. Like that has to make a moral difference, and I think part of that will be the morally relevant features surrounding killing and consuming or not. That's why I think it's impermissible in all well, other than the very obscure circumstances that philosophers come up with, it's impermissible to eat a person. It might not
mm.
be for an animal in the context that I've outlined where they're free from pain. That's where I'd be open to it. I've yet to see a really convincing reason to say, well, that's not, can't do that.
It's I find it interesting as well that I think a lot of our arguments for the sort of let's say moral impermissibility of eating meat are mainly like sort of production based, and I guess that's going to be the case when you live in a society that you know allows this level of consumption of meat because that doesn't arise without the production methods that we also have, and that those are kind of the more abhorrent parts of eating meat. And I think it's where it's what I guess I just kind of just don't I just sort of separate. I just come out, somehow manage not to engage in that. I'm not Whenever I'm eating meat, I'm not sort of justifying it in my head as though there's no sort of argument going through my mind saying, "Oh, I'm justified in doing this." It's just simply that I am just not thinking about it. And I don't know. So it does make me. I kind of been grappling with the issue a bit more recently. It sort of sounds similar, very similar to you, I think, where it's just the more you kind of really begin to work through the problems and why kind of try and come up with any sort of reason why you might perhaps justify meat consumption, it gets more and more difficult, which I think is what makes the answers to this survey more interesting because I feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah, so do I. And that's why I thought, well, maybe I should look into this area of applied ethics and
Yeah.
see like what the actual case is here. Because to me, this seems pretty straightforward. Like the things we've been
Mm,
saying here. I don't see a way around it. But that doesn't mean
mm,
it's not there. It's just
mm,
that it it I think what the other factor that gets me is that I owned a pig in my early days when I was like
mm,
17. My mom and we had a pet pig. And you quickly discover that these things are just as emotive and smart and as regular domesticated animals, and that the chance for connection, human connection with them is just as great. And then you generalize from that and you think, well, if it holds for the pig, it probably holds for all of these animals that I'm consuming. And if that's the case, if I think it's abhorrent to eat a dog because they have something close to a fully formed personality, it's probably the case for other animals as well. I'm just not exposed to them. And so I think rather than going to the conclusion, well, it's permissible to just eat dogs and cats and so on, it's probably that we shouldn't be eating any of them. But then that kind of argument would seem to spoil my nuanced answer where it's okay to eat animals if they're not in pain. Yeah, I don't know. I don't
mm.
know. I mean, it
I guess,
gets interesting when you realize animals have, well, many animals have like unique personalities. That seems morally relevant. I don't know.
yeah, I guess exactly. It all comes down to I think it's the production side of it is what's sort of most abhorrent, and it's also the perhaps it's an interesting why. I guess it's because I guess a lot of these arguments against meat consumption and for vegetarianism focus on production, and yet I don't know why is those principles don't apply for say like hunting based things. If you are hunting your meat and you're using all of it, you're sort of ethically consuming it
Yeah.
in that sense where you're not sort of sending most of it to waste. Why is that any better? Is it just simply that we're not subjecting the animal? The animal has lived free for all of the life it has known, and its shape of life, its well-being is greater, far greater than the factory farmed animal, and it is hopefully sort of put out like instantly when you're hunting it.
Yeah.
But you've still potentially cut that life short. But I guess I feel like that has perhaps more justification perhaps in nature, maybe, where you could appeal to a sort of natural arguments or nature-based arguments for why it would be the case that humans can hunt and kill and eat meat, but not factory farm meat.
Yeah, I've heard a hunter give the justification, which I'm not sure about, that like if these animals didn't die by being hunted, they'd probably die a horrific death by being eaten,
Yeah.
or breaking their leg and slowly starving to death. I mean, that's a good point. Animals don't usually die old age peacefully in their sleep in the wild. That normally doesn't happen. So there is that point that you're not necessarily depriving it of anything, and you might actually be giving it a better way to go than if you didn't hunt it. I don't know. I'm not sure about the reasoning behind that. That might admit of certain very obvious counterexamples, but it's something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting as well because if you were one of these sort of um, I don't know, kind of like I think back of like Epicureans and their approach to like death and how dying isn't bad, sort of for the one who dies, provided of course, that the death isn't painful or anything like that. It does seem like you can perhaps justify the hunting an animal yourself and eating it yourself as in that is far more defensible perhaps than in the defending anything like factory farming
I think
or
most
just the
people would agree with that.
scale of meat production.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think it's splitting hairs at a certain point because the vast majority of animal consumption and animal product consumption occurs in factory farmed contexts.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
even if we got rid of just that, it would be a huge improvement. So right. So then we have to give the point that 48%, the plurality anyway, the one with the most, philosophers said that it is permissible to eat animals and animal products, which,
Mm.
okay, that maybe they are operating with the same subtle distinctions in mind that we have between factory farmed animals and free
Mm.
range, which they
Yeah.
did not specify in the survey. So I guess that kind of mitigates the shock of like, really?
Yeah, 'cause I could. That just to me seems like the only reason why it's sort of in a vacuum. The consumption of animals is okay. It's just simply that one can
Right.
heavily disagree then with the means by which we put
Yes.
meat on the plate in front of us is the morally impermissible part, perhaps, of that equation.
That is the best I can come up with because besides that, as a reflective philosopher myself, I can't see how so many people would come to that place. So